What if the secret to world peace was actually as simple as spreading democracy? I mean, for decades, this really powerful, hopeful idea has shaped foreign policy all over the world. But is it the whole story, or is there maybe a hidden danger lurking inside that promise? And this quote from U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Strobe Talbot, I mean, it just nails the appeal, right? It's so simple, so confident. It's the kind of big, clean idea you can build a whole worldview around. This idea that one political system can unlock both safety and prosperity for everyone. But that's the big question, isn't it? The one we're really going to dig into today. Is it truly that simple? Or does this beautiful, optimistic promise hide some really dangerous complications? All right, so first up, let's talk about the promise itself. To really get why this idea is so powerful, we need to go back and look at where it came from and the evidence that makes it so darn convincing to so many people. So this idea really burst onto the world stage in a huge way with U.S. President Woodrow Wilson right after World War I. Now, you probably remember him for wanting to make the world safe for democracy, but it's actually more accurate to say he wanted to make the world safe through democracy. His belief was that if governments were based on the will of the people, peace would just naturally follow. And this is what scholars call the Liberal Peace Thesis. It's kind of the fancy name for this core belief that democracies are just fundamentally more peaceful creatures, both at home and when they deal with other countries. This is the big idea that has guided so much of modern peace building. And look, there's a really good reason this idea caught on. The evidence behind it is actually pretty strong. Decades of research showed that established democracies have this kind of separate peace. They pretty much never go to war with each other. And internally, they have way less civil violence because their whole system is built on talking it out, on negotiation and compromise, not just on force. It's no surprise this became such a big deal. Okay, but here's where that simple, beautiful promise starts to get complicated. Really complicated. Because all that evidence we just looked at, it's about stable, established democracies. What about the countries that are trying to become democratic? See, here's the crucial distinction that gets missed all the time. The end goal of being a peaceful democracy is one thing, but the messy, often chaotic and violent process of getting there, that's a whole different beast. So much of the thinking and the policy that comes from it focuses only on the finish line, totally ignoring the dangerous race itself. And this chart just lays it out side by side. While stable democracies are peaceful, researchers have found that states in transition can actually be more prone to war. Why? Well, because when the old system falls apart, you get a power vacuum. And into that vacuum rush political opportunists who can stir up aggressive nationalism to grab power, which leads to a much higher risk of violence. And this is not just some academic theory, right? We've seen this play out in the real world, tragically. The violent collapse of Yugoslavia, the civil wars in places like Burundi and Sri Lanka, they've all been linked to the destabilizing effects of trying to democratize too quickly. Even just opening up the economy, so-called liberalization, has sparked riots and unrest all over the world. That journey, it turns out, can be incredibly perilous. And that leads us to an even deeper issue. A blind spot, really, in the modern way of thinking about this. It's something the classical thinkers of the Enlightenment actually understood really well. You see, the entire modern debate about whether democracies are more peaceful than autocracies, it's built on this one massive, unspoken assumption that you already have a functioning state to begin with. But for peace builders working in countries that have been shattered by civil war, that is the one thing they absolutely cannot assume. They're often working in places that are basically in a state of anarchy. And this is where, believe it or not, we got to go back to old school philosophers like John Locke. See, they didn't start by asking what type of government is best. They started with a much more basic question. How do you escape what Locke called the state of nature? A terrifying world with no government, full of constant fear and the threat of violence. So you can see this huge shift in focus, right? The classical liberals were obsessed with step one. How do you build an effective government from nothing? Modern scholars, on the other hand, they tend to just skip that step and jump right into debating the features of governments that are already up and running. The state itself, what the philosopher Thomas Hobbes famously called the Leviathan, this powerful central authority, it's kind of vanished from the modern conversation. I mean, even the guys who founded American democracy, like Alexander Hamilton, they totally got this. They were, of course, deeply concerned with limiting government to protect liberty. But they also knew that a government that was too weak was just a recipe for disaster. A government that can't enforce its own laws or protect its citizens is, for all intents and purposes, a bad government no matter what it says on paper. And he wasn't alone. This idea was everywhere. You had Hobbes arguing for an all-powerful sovereign, a leviathan, to keep the peace. Adam Smith, the father of free market capitalism, still said a state needed standing army to maintain order. And Immanuel Kant warned that total freedom without laws to back it up just collapses into savagery. What's the common thread? You need a state that's strong enough to provide security before you can really enjoy liberty. And that is the key insight. The classical liberals didn't want to get rid of the Leviathan, this powerful state. They wanted to tame it. They wanted to domesticate it. They understood that you needed a government with enough power to enforce the rule of law, but you had to balance that with constitutional limits to protect people's freedom. It was a balancing act, not a simple choice. So after all that, what does this mean for building peace in the world today? Well, it suggests we might need to fundamentally rethink our playbook, which has been based on a very particular and maybe flawed reading of history.
So this is the tough spot today's peace builders are in. The modern approach, the Wilsonian one, is inspired by this beautiful destination, a stable, peaceful democracy. But in focusing on the destination, it ignores the incredibly dangerous journey of getting there. And maybe most importantly, it forgets the most basic lesson from the classical thinkers. Before a state can be liberal or democratic, it first has to just be. It has to function.
And really, this is what it all boils down to. For a country clawing its way out of a civil war, the real choice isn't between autocracy and democracy. The starting point is something much closer to that state of nature that Hobbes and Locke were so worried about, where there's no real authority at all. And in those situations, the classical liberals might have a lot more to teach us than we think. Which leaves us with one last and pretty provocative question. To build a lasting peace in the world's most broken places, do we first need to focus on building an effective, powerful state, a leviathan, before we can ever hope to tame it into a democracy? It's a challenging thought that turns a lot of our modern thinking completely on its head.